welcome back, and I hope you're having a great day today. Today, personally, I was not because it's been raining for so many days, and even though I love the rain and I love a cozy cold day, I've been having a lot of those lately. So I was so ready for a sunny day today, and the weather betrayed me. But it's okay. I think tomorrow's supposed to be sunny, so tomorrow I'm gonna do some fun things. But today, I thought, okay, so I'm currently reading 3 different books, and I am not done with either of them because I decided I would read them all at the same time. Why? I don't know. But I thought instead I would show you some of my favorite fantasy books that I've read. Some of them I have mentioned to you before, and some of them I've talked extensively about, so I won't really go too much into detail with those. But here is my list of my favorite fantasy romance I've read, and some of these are series, but I thought I'll just include the first one of the series just because, you know, that's where it all starts. So I have 5 different books here that I want to tell you a little bit about because they are my favorite fantasy romance ever. So I'll tell you a little bit about what they're about and why I love them so much and why I think you should read them. They are pretty diverse, I would say, because usually, you know, when you go for fantasy romance, it's not that crazy to find similar topics, similar world settings, because we're here for a fun time, you know, like I'm not here for a life-changing story and world. If I find one, then amazing, but I'm not going with that expectations. But I feel like these are pretty diverse on their topics, so let's talk about them. And just a quick reminder that all of my prints, my original paintings, my commission slots, and more will all be available in my shop that's on my website. I'll be leaving the link down below in case you want to check it out. And now back to the video. I will try to go in order of when I read them, like the oldest to the most recent one. And first we got An Arrow to the Moon by Emily X.R. Pan. This one, I think this one was my first fantasy romance that I read in so long. So it was like my reintroduction to the genre in a sense. And it was a really good one for that because now that I've read some more, I realized that it's not necessarily one of the most in-depth stories, but I think at the time for what I needed, it was really good. This one is also very, very heavily annotated, as you can see. I think I went a little crazy on the annotations, honestly, just because I was so excited to be reading this book after so long for fantasy, because when I go back to my annotations, they weren't really, some of them are not necessary, but there's no rules, okay? They're everywhere. So I highlighted everything that was essential to the story, like with the mindset that if I come back to read it again, or if I wanted to tell somebody about some specific moments in the book, I would highlight like just the essential lines that were like, okay, this is a key moment to the plot. So that's why there's so many highlighted moments. There's obviously some that I just loved, and the tabs, I don't really know why there's so many tabs. Even seeing it now, some of them are like, okay, what are we tabbing? What's worth tabbing in this page? So don't rely on my tabs, rely on my words. It was a really fun story to read. I have this little, I think I mentioned it in the last time that I was showing you my bookshelf and some of the books. I have a little review that I wrote the first time I read it. At the time, I gave it a 4.5. Now, looking back, and like I said, now having read so many more, I would give it a 3. But not because I like it any less, just because now I realize some of the things that are like, could have been better. But in my original review, I wrote beautiful story, interesting plot, and a mystery you're trying to figure out. It definitely has some Sailor Moon vibes to the real plot of the story. Only wish it was longer. The end felt a little rushed. And that last part is actually the reason why I brought it down from a 4.5 to 3, because I really feel like how rushed this story was, is actually a little too much that it kind of ruined a little bit my enjoyment, because the story begins with these two characters, Luna and Hunter, in a modern day scenario, but it's very obviously connected to these fantasy characters that they talk about during the story, and it's Chinese mythology. It even says in the back, it's Romeo and Juliet meets Chinese mythology. So they're supposed to represent these two characters, and it is very evident since the beginning. I don't think that was something that was supposed to be a mystery or like a plot twist. It was very obvious since the beginning of the story. But it was more like a symbolism rather than a literal representation of these characters through them. But eventually, they find out that they have abilities that are also very similar to these characters. So as the story goes on, you start connecting more dots of, oh yeah, this is similar to this other fantasy story that they keep referencing. I do think that at some points, it was supposed to be a little bit of a plot twist, like, oh, turns out they're connected. And if it was, then it was pretty obvious. I read it with the mindset that this was supposed to be obvious since the beginning. So at least to me, it didn't seem like it was supposed to be any way a plot twist. But I don't know. Also, the one thing that I mentioned, how it reminded me of Sailor Moon, it's because of that same connection that they have to these other celestial characters. Just like in Sailor Moon, we have Princess Serenity or Queen Serenity and Sailor Moon. It's kind of like that kind of connection where eventually it's like, oh, are they the same person? Are they not? Read it. But that's where it starts getting all rushed. But here's the thing. I still think it's worth reading because I had fun the whole time I was reading it. It was a little bit predictable, but other than that, it was a fun, quick story to read. Also, the chapters, it's very interesting. The chapters switch what character we are looking through. So you see, like this character, we have Hunter's point of view. Next we have his father. No, this is Luna's father, and it just switches every chapter for a different person. Sometimes chapters are just 2 pages long because we just had to see this person's point of view and what happened in the next one. And you will either love that or hate that, depending on what your preference is. There's no in between. No, you know what? I take it back. There is an in between. I like that because I personally get distracted really easily when I'm reading. So I generally enjoy quick chapters, even if I read the same amount of pages that I would in one really long chapter. Just thinking in my mind that I read 10 chapters opposed to one just makes me feel a little more accomplished, and it helps me keep going because I feel like the little goals that I'm trying to achieve are a little easier. But I feel like this one had a little too many chapters, and I think it was a little bit distracting for the fluidity, the continuity of the story. I don't know if that's the word, but yeah, it was a little hard sometimes to just keep following where we kept switching characters every 2 pages. But it didn't bother me too much, just because I prefer in general just many quick chapters. This one just had a little too much, even for me, but not necessarily something that is a bad thing, just different. For my next book that I read, I have A Violet Made of Thorns by Gina Chen, and this one also was one of my first. I think this was actually my second. I read it right after An Arrow to the Moon, and this one was what I think really introduced me to my love for fantasy, because even though An Arrow to the Moon is fantasy as well and it has some mythology involved with it, but it was mostly just modern time teenagers, you know. But this one is like my first one, actual just pure fantasy in a fantasy world. And after reading this one, I decided I need more, and this is my new life, and this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. So I would say I loved it. I will say from now, the prince, the main love interest, he was not my favorite, but I'm giving him a chance to see what redeeming qualities we give him in the second book. Because he was not necessarily bad. It wasn't one of those enemies to lover that felt a little bit too enemy. It was more like I didn't feel a lot of chemistry. Like there were some random moments where they would have a fun time together. They would be friendly with each other and all that, and like you could see it being possible. But then other times I'm like, do they even like each other? And I don't even mean like, again, like I don't mean like an enemies to lover. I just mean like, do they like each other? You know, like I don't know. I didn't feel that spark. But I loved the main character so much. And this is one of those romance, fantasy romance that even though I'm here for that, I'm here for the love. But I ended up staying for her. I'm like, yeah, if you end up with him, that's fine. But like I loved the main character so much that she was enough for me. So one of the things I love the most about this main character, Violet, is that she was super sarcastic and funny, which is, I'm not gonna say it's unusual for fantasy main characters that are female, but specifically when we have like this strong female main character, usually we have like really serious or like, you know, they've been through a lot, and that's super amazing. But I have not personally read a lot of like those actually just funny, sarcastic main characters that are just there to have a good time. And that's exactly what Violet was here for. She is friends with the Prince Cyrus, and they have that kind of relationship, like, yeah, you're the prince, but I've known you forever, so whatever, I'm not impressed. And she is a seer, which is a person that has this ability that they can sort of see the future. But here's the cool thing about her. She's a liar. So she would use her title because everybody knew what she was supposed to be. There's like this one seer for the prince, and they can get switched, but she was supposed to be assigned for the prince that is her friend. And she gets manipulated into this situation where she has to, you know, pretend to use her abilities to see what's convenient, and then she also uses that in her favor. So there's a lot of like funny moments like that and interesting moments where even though she has this big position of power, she's not really a person to trust. And not necessarily because she's a bad person herself, but more I think because of her being young and her situation in life and feeling like she doesn't fit in. She just doesn't really see the importance as to why it's so much of a responsibility until some things happen that kind of force her into understanding and having to change her mindset and then trying to be better. But it was an overall super fun story. Nothing I would say either that was like, oh my god, this is revolutionary, especially because there's just one book yet. I don't know, maybe with the second book things might change for me, but as a standalone story, well, it's not, because even the ending is very open, like there's a cliffhanger and I need to know what happens next. But I also feel a little bit of the Beauty and the Beast, a little bit. If you know, you know. I feel like if I say why, I'm giving a little too much away. But there's a little bit of those elements. And this one, honestly, I would say 4, only because, like I said, I did not love Cyrus as much, but also we didn't get to see a lot of him. I think that's probably why I didn't love him too much, because I feel like, and this is great because I loved her, the story was very focused only on Violet and her situation, and Cyrus's relationship with her was sort of a subplot, and that was great. But I guess because I came with the mindset that this was gonna be a romance, I was like, where's the guy? You know, where is he? Because we see him very sporadically. But that aside, is really fun. You should read it, and the second one is coming out soon. So there's more. now I got my favorite one in my hand. And this one, I don't know if I should say it's a fantasy romance. It's definitely fantasy, but romance, like I said with Violet Made of Thorn, I think was sort of a subplot. And that is The Cruel Prince, the series, the whole series. I had so much fun with The Cruel Prince and Jude. I think Jude is currently my new favorite fictional female main character for fantasy. That sounds so specific, but I think she's now currently my favorite fantasy main character in general because she's the best. She's a human. She's the only human, well, her and her twin sister Taryn, they're the only humans in this world full of fairies and all sorts of fairy creatures, fake creatures, fantasy creatures. They hate humans. So as you can imagine, she's having a really hard time fitting in. She has this dream that she wants to be a fighter as well. And of course, if you're in a world where you're the only one without powers, and on top of that, you want to fight these people with powers, she's in a really rough position. And she's trained by her adoptive father. Father is a strong word to use with him, but here her adoptive father, who is he's a war general, so he's the best person that could ever train her. So she goes through all of this, she meets the prince, Carden, and they have a very, very enemies to kind of friends relationship in the first book. And eventually, obviously, it starts developing just as her story individually, which is something that I love so much because even in a story where romance is a main part of the story, I love when the characters have individual lives, that they are achieving their goals and fighting and doing all of this, and that's exactly what this story is about. The relationship with Carden is more like a consequence to the things that happen to her and her story, but we see a lot of her fighting her own battles, doing her own thing. Nothing like, oh, she gets saved by the prince. Actually the opposite. She's the knight saving the prince, and I think that's why I love her so much, because she's not only a strong character, but also it's like reversing a little bit the roles in a fun way that feels very natural. Like, it's not one of those characters that is like, oh, you know, it's just trying to do something different. No, she does the thing and she does it well. There is a second series that just recently came out, I think in January, and it is The Stolen Heir. It is in the same universe. Our main characters here are Oak, which is Jude's little brother, and Suran, which is a girl that we get to see a little bit in the third book of the Cruel Prince series, but we get to see it's almost like a reverse version of Jude's situation in the fairy world. We have Suran, which is I'll put a picture of what she is, I forget right now, but she is sent to the human world, and it's so interesting to see like the different dynamic of having this in the first series, this human girl living around monsters, and now we have this monster girl living around humans, and how it's still very hard for her as well, even though she has power and she's strong, but just it's the fact that you're not fitting in what actually makes you weak at the beginning, until you learn how to use that to your advantage. So amazing way to turn the same plot into a different perspective, and it's amazing. I didn't say, for The Cruel Prince, the whole series I would say is a 4.5, and then the books I would say 4.5 for the first one, 4 for the second one, 3 for the third one. I won't elaborate. For this one I would say it's a 4. It might change once the next book comes out, because when it comes to series, I like to judge them as a whole, because, you know, even if what happened in this specific book I liked it or not, if the ending of the series sucked, it's gonna take away some of my enjoyment here. It might be biased, but that's how I judge them. So for now, it's a 4, but it might change. But really fun time reading it. I read it pretty quickly too. Well, I was sick and that made me take a little longer. Oh my god, I gotta show you. This is so, I should go to jail for this. But I love taking off the sleeves for the books, and I took mine to work while I was sick and I was taking Dayquil, and I might have spilled some Dayquil. And now it has like this yellow stain. I don't know if you can see it well, but it looks like my dog peed on it. And I was really tempted to buy another one, but I cannot afford it. So we're gonna stay with Dayquil over here until, you know what, I don't think I'm gonna buy another one. This is a fun memory of the time that I was sick. And lastly, Caraval. I feel like I talk about this book so much that I feel like I should not talk about it again. But I will very briefly. And if you want to see more about it, I will link the videos where I talk about it, because I did a little too much already. But basically, this is a series of this fantasy world where this character called Legend organizes a game every year that is similar to a carnival, but you don't know what's reality, what's not, and you have to remind yourself it's just a game, but things start getting really confusing as it goes. And we have our main character, first Scarlet and Julian, and then on our second book and third book, we switch perspective to have Tella, her sister, as our main character. She also appears in the first book, but yeah, it's not that confusing. We have two main characters. I originally came to this series because I read Once Upon a Broken Heart. It was supposed to be the second series, but I read it first. I already mentioned that too. And I came here because I wanted to see this character called Jax that I love from the other series. This is where he first showed up to the story. So I came in just for Jax, and then I stayed for everybody else. But I will say, I have beef with Scarlet because I don't want to say I don't like her, but some of the decisions she makes, I'm like, I get it. I understand why you did that, but I also don't. And then we have Tella, who I like way more, but on the first book, I didn't like her. So in the first book, I like Scarlet, I didn't like Tella, and then in the second book, I switched, and I'm like, Scarlet, what are you doing? But I'm like, okay, Tella, I get you, I like you. Also, we have Julian, who is Scarlet's main love interest, and we have Dante as well. We have our main characters who are, wait, what are the main characters? Scarlet, Tella, Julian, and Dante. I'm missing somebody. And Jax. And Legend. I'm a mess. So basically, I do not like Scarlet. I like everybody else. And I love Jax and Julian. That's my summary. I feel like if I talk a little too much about it, I will spoil, because I have so many comments on what happens. And as a whole, the series, I would say it was a 4.5. The first book was a 4.5 as well, and then the other two I would say are a 4. And I know I'm giving these high ratings, but it's because I genuinely love fantasy romance so much. And these are not the kind of books that I'm coming here to learn a life lesson or for the deep material or anything like that. These books are for fun. I had fun, so that's what it is. I'm not gonna say these are like the most deepest stories ever, but they are definitely fun. Even if you have beef with the characters, it's like you want to keep reading just to keep having that beef. So yeah, those were my 5 books / book series, fantasy romance book series that I enjoyed. This is obviously my favorite genre, and I do have some more books that I want to buy soon. I have like a TBR of books that I haven't bought yet, and there at least half of them are fantasy romance, because anytime I see a new one, a suggestion, I'm like, to the list. If you have any suggestions or any book you think I should check out, please let me know, because I love seeing new suggestions all the time. I'm not reading any, and I don't think I currently have any right now that I want to read in my bookshelf, so I am in need of new ones. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back next week with some more, I think with my April wrap up. So yeah, see ya.